The water is brown. That is the first thing you learn down here. Not the clear mountain runoff that feeds the canals above, not the crisp lake water that Riften's fishermen pull their catches from. Brown, the colour of rust and rot and things best left unexamined. I cup it in my palms anyway and drink, because I have not tasted anything else in 3 days, and my tongue has forgotten how to complain. Somewhere in the darkness behind me, I hear the scratching. Skeevers. Always skeevers. Their claws on stone sound almost like whispers if you have been down here long enough. And I have been down here long enough. 7 years, by my counting, though I stopped trusting my counting around year 4. The darkness does something to your sense of time. Days blend into one eternal twilight, lit only by the green glow of fungus and the occasional torch that someone bothered to keep burning. I used to have a name that meant something. I used to have hands that knew the weight of coin honestly earned. Now I have this, a corner of damp stone that I call mine only because no one stronger has bothered to take it from me. A knife with a broken tip that I keep tucked against my ribs, and the knowledge, the absolute certainty, that I will never see the sun again. Not because I cannot climb those stairs. The exit is perhaps 200 paces from where I crouch. I know every turn, every loose stone, every shadow where someone might be waiting to collect what little I have left. I could be on the surface in 10 minutes if I moved quickly. I could feel the wind off Lake Honrich on my face before the hour finished. But I will not go. None of us will. And by the time you understand why, it will already be too late for you too. I came to Riften in the summer of 4E194, when I was 23 years old and stupid enough to believe that wanting something badly enough could make it happen. My father had been a tanner in Whiterun, and his father before him, and his father before that, stretching back to a time when Ysgrammar's heirs still performed deeds worthy of song, and the dragons were nothing but stories to frighten children. I was supposed to inherit the business. I was supposed to spend my life up to my elbows in chemicals and animal hides, breathing in that sharp smell until it became part of me. Instead, I fell in love with a merchant's daughter who wanted silk dresses and silver jewelry, and I convinced myself that I could give her these things if only I found the right opportunity. Riften, they said. Riften was where fortunes were made. The fisheries were booming, the meaderies were expanding, and a man with ambition could find his place among the rising merchant class. What they did not tell me was that Riften had already been claimed. Every legitimate business answered to the Blackbriar family, and every illegitimate one answered to someone far worse. But I did not know that then. I arrived with 300 septims sewn into my boot lining, a letter of introduction to a trading company that would be bankrupted within the month, and the unshakable confidence of a young man who had never truly failed at anything. The first year was not so bad. I found work at the docks, unloading crates and barrels, learning the rhythm of commerce that flowed through Riften's canals. I sent letters home to Whiterun, telling my beloved about the apartment I would rent for us, the shop I would open, the life we would build together. I ate fish stew every night at the Bee and Barb and taught myself to ignore the way conversations stopped when certain people entered the room. The trouble started, as trouble often does, with a single decision that seemed reasonable at the time. A man at the docks offered me an opportunity. Night work, he called it. Moving cargo after the official shipments had been logged, cargo that needed to avoid the attention of the guards and the taxation of the Jarl. The pay was 3 times what I earned in daylight hours. I told myself I would only do it once, just until I had saved enough for that apartment. You can guess how that story ends. Everyone can. It is the oldest story in Riften, worn smooth by repetition like the stones beneath my feet. One job becomes 2, becomes 10, becomes a debt you did not realize you were accruing. Interest, compounding in the shadows where no contract was ever signed, but where every agreement is enforced with absolute certainty. I owed 4,000 septims to the Thieves' Guild by the end of my second year in Riften. I had never stolen anything myself, never picked a lock or cut a purse. I had simply moved the wrong crates for the wrong people and failed to understand that in this city, ignorance is not a defense. It is barely even an inconvenience for those collecting what you owe. They gave me a choice, of course. The guild is nothing if not business-minded. I could work off my debt through services rendered, which meant becoming one of them, surrendering whatever remained of my honest life. Or I could attempt to pay through legitimate means, which at my dock workers' wages would have taken approximately 47 years, assuming I never ate or paid rent. Or I could run, I chose to run. Down. The Ratway was not unknown to me. Everyone in Riften knows about the Ratway. The beggars mutter about it. The guards joke about it. Mothers use it to frighten children who wander too close to the canal grates. It is the city's shadow, its festering underbelly, a maze of ancient sewers and forgotten passages that spreads beneath the streets like rot beneath a wound. I thought I would hide there for a week, maybe two. Just long enough for the guild to find easier targets, to write off my debt as uncollectible and move on to more profitable ventures. I brought food, a water skin, 2 torches, and the same misplaced confidence that had carried me to Riften in the first place. I found the entrance through a door in the lower marketplace that everyone pretends not to see. The smell hit me first. That wet decay that would become so familiar I would eventually stop noticing it entirely. Then the darkness, deeper than any night I had known on the surface, swallowing my torchlight like hungry water. And finally, the sounds. Dripping, scratching, and somewhere far below, the murmur of voices that might have been human. The Ratway is not one place. That is the first lesson I learned. It is a dozen places layered on top of each other, each with its own rules, its own dangers, its own population of those who have fallen through the cracks of the world above. The upper tunnels near the entrance are almost civilized, if you define civilization loosely enough. Beggars cluster there, the newly desperate who still remember what sunlight looks like, who still believe they might climb back up someday. Go deeper, and you find the Warrens, where the long-term residents have carved out something resembling a community. They have rules down there, territories, a primitive economy based on what can be scavenged, stolen, or traded from above. The strongest control the best sleeping spots, the cleanest water sources, the passages that lead to places worth going. The weak survive by usefulness or by staying out of sight entirely. Deeper still are the vaults, and I do not speak of the vaults. No one speaks of the vaults. The things that live there have been underground so long that they have forgotten they were ever anything else. Rogue mages who practice arts too dangerous for even the college to tolerate. Killers so broken that even the guild will not employ them. Thalmor agents conducting interrogations that require absolute privacy, their screaming subjects never seen again. The desperate and the damned, and those who have become something worse than either. I went there once, in my 3rd year, chasing a wounded skeever that I could not afford to let escape. The tunnel narrowed and the air changed, and I heard voices ahead, chanting in a language I did not recognize, accompanied by a sound like wet meat being torn apart. Then the chanting stopped, and I felt something become aware of me. Not heard, not saw, felt, as if whatever was down there could sense my presence through the stone itself. I did not catch the skeever. I ran, faster than I had run in years, and I did not stop until I was back in familiar territory, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing off the walls. I never went back to that passage. I sealed it with rubble from a collapsed section nearby, stacking stones until I could convince myself that nothing from the other side could get through. Sometimes, late at night when the Ratway is at its quietest, I think I hear something pressing against those stones, testing them, waiting. I tell myself it is just rats. Everything down here is just rats. In the end, I spent my first 3 days in the upper tunnels, convinced that I was being clever. I rationed my food, conserved my torches, and watched the entrance like a man expecting rescue. On the 4th day, a woman named Riften found me and explained, with a patience that I now recognize as cruelty, exactly how foolish I had been. The guild does not forget debts. They do not write them off. They do not move on. They are patient in ways that surface dwellers cannot comprehend. And they know the Ratway better than anyone, because the ragged flagon, their headquarters, sits in the heart of it like a spider at the center of a web. I had not escaped them by coming down here. I had delivered myself directly to their doorstep. Riften had been in the Ratway for 11 years when I met her. She had come from Windhelm originally, fleeing a husband who had beaten her nearly to death, and she had thought the darkness might hide her from his rage. It did, eventually. But by the time she was safe from him, she was no longer capable of living anywhere else. She taught me the first real lesson of this place. The Ratway does not hold you with chains or locked doors. It holds you with something far more effective. It holds you with what you become. After a month underground, I noticed that my eyes had changed. I could see further in the dim fungal light, pick out shapes in shadows that would have been impenetrable before. My skin had paled, taking on the greyish cast of someone who has not seen sun in weeks. My sense of smell had sharpened until I could identify individuals by their particular stench, track movement through corridors by the disturbance of air. These changes felt like adaptations, survival mechanisms. I was proud of them, in a way. I was becoming suited to my environment, evolving to meet its demands. What I did not understand, what a Trefner tried to tell me, was that these changes were one-way roads. Every adaptation to the darkness was a surrender of the light. My eyes that could see in the gloom became eyes that could no longer tolerate brightness. My nose that could track a skeever through 3 turns of corridor became a nose that found the smell of fresh air painful, overwhelming, wrong. The Ratway was remaking me in its image, and every day I stayed was another thread cut between myself and the world above. I tried to leave once, around the 3rd month. I climbed the stairs to the marketplace entrance and pushed open the door, and the light hit me like a physical blow. I staggered backward, hands clapped over my eyes, tears streaming down my cheeks as my pupils screamed in protest at the assault. The colors were too vivid, the edges too sharp, everything overwhelming in its detail and saturation. I had grown accustomed to a world of grey and brown, and the sickly green of bioluminescent fungus. The blue of the sky was an assault. The red of a merchant's awning was violence. The noise was worse. After weeks of silence broken only by dripping water and quiet footsteps, the chaos of the marketplace was overwhelming. Voices shouting, carts rattling, metal clanging, a dog barking somewhere, a child crying, all of it crashing into my ears like waves of sound designed specifically to destroy me. I could not separate one noise from another. They merged into a wall of incomprehensible chaos that made my head throb and my stomach lurch. And the smells. By the divines, the smells. Fish from the market stalls and bread from somewhere nearby, and perfume on a passing woman, and manure from the stables and incense from the temple, and sweat and smoke and 100 other odors that I could not identify, all competing for attention, all demanding recognition. My nose, which had learned to parse the subtle variations of decay and moisture in the Ratway's still air, was completely overwhelmed by the sensory cacophony of the living world. I made it perhaps 10 steps into the square before I collapsed. A guard found me curled in the gutter, shaking, unable to open my eyes or uncover my ears. He thought I was a skooma addict experiencing withdrawal. He was not entirely wrong about the withdrawal part. They brought me to the Temple of Mara, where a kind priestess tried to help me. She gave me a bed in a quiet room with the curtains drawn, brought me food that I could not eat because the flavors were too intense, spoke to me in gentle tones that felt like shouting. After 3 days of agony, I asked to be returned to the Ratway. The priestess cried when I made my request. She said she had seen this before, with miners who had spent too long underground, with prisoners who had been kept in darkness for years. She said there were treatments, adjustments that could be made gradually if I was willing to suffer through them. She said it might take months or years, but eventually I could readapt to the surface. Months or years. In that time, the guild would find me. In that time, my debt would continue to grow. In that time, I would have to survive in a world that had become genuinely hostile to my existence, dependent on the charity of others, vulnerable in ways that the Ratway had taught me to fear above all else. I went back down. It felt like coming home. The darkness wrapped around me like a familiar blanket, and my screaming senses finally quieted. The brown water tasted like relief. The distant scratching of skeevers was almost comforting in its familiarity. I told myself I would try again later, when I was stronger, when I had prepared better for the transition. But later became never, as later always does down here. The Ratway is patient. It can wait for you to stop fighting, stop hoping, stop believing that you are anything other than what it has made you. The years that followed are harder to describe because they blur together in my memory like water mixing with water. I learned the passages. All of them, the ones that appeared on no maps, and the ones that had been forgotten for so long that even the guild did not patrol them. I carved out my territory in the middle depths, defensible but not valuable enough to attract serious challenge. I learned which of my neighbors could be trusted for trade and which would kill me for my boots if given the opportunity. I learned to eat what the Ratway provided. Skeever meat, properly prepared, is not as terrible as you might imagine. The mushrooms that grow on the walls are edible if you know which ones to avoid. There are fish in some of the deeper waterways, blind things with flesh that tastes of copper, but flesh nonetheless. I stopped being hungry sometime around year 2 and started simply existing, feeding my body out of habit rather than desire. I learned the politics of the underground. The Thieves' Guild tolerates the Ratway's population because we serve as a buffer, a first line of warning against anyone who might come looking for them. In exchange, they do not actively hunt us, merely collecting tribute from those who have something worth taking. It is a parasitic relationship, but parasites can survive for a very long time if they are careful not to kill their hosts. The Ragged Flagon sits at the heart of the Ratway like a mockery of every tavern I ever visited on the surface. They serve mead down there, actual mead, along with food that has not been scavenged from refuse piles. The guild members drink and laugh and conduct their business as though they were not surrounded by miles of festering tunnels and the desperate creatures those tunnels produce. I went there once, in my second year, to trade information about a collapsed passage for a few coins. The warmth of the torches felt wrong on my skin. The smell of cooking meat made my stomach clench in confusion. I took my payment and left quickly, retreating to the darkness that had become more comfortable than light. There is a man named Gian the Fist who controls the upper warrens. He earned his name through a method of dispute resolution that leaves little room for interpretation. I watched him beat a thief to death over a stolen blanket, his massive hands rising and falling with mechanical precision, his face showing no more emotion than a farmer threshing wheat. The blanket was moth-eaten and stained with things I did not want to identify. It was worth less than the corpse that lay beside it when he finished. But that is not the point. The point is that he owns everything in his territory, and ownership must be demonstrated or it ceases to exist. I gave Gian a portion of everything I scavenged for 3 years until I found a passage he did not know about, a route that let me bypass his territory entirely. The day I stopped paying tribute was the day I became truly invisible, existing in the spaces between territories, belonging to no one's domain but my own. I learned about the others who had come down here for reasons like mine and reasons nothing like mine. Murderers hiding from justice, apostates hiding from the Thalmor, a mage from the College of Winterhold who had experimented with something that had left her unable to tolerate magical energies, which meant she could no longer exist anywhere that enchantments were common, which meant effectively nowhere on the surface. A Nord warrior who had fled from a battle and could not bear the shame of facing anyone who might recognize his cowardice. There was a woman who had killed her children during a fever madness and could not remember doing it, only waking to find their bodies and understanding that she could never return to a world that would demand explanations she could not give. There was an Argonian who had escaped from a Dunmer master in Morrowind and crossed the entire province on foot, living in sewers and drainage ditches the whole way because he could not stand the open sky anymore. There was an old man who claimed to have been a priest of the divines before he lost his faith, though he never explained what had taken it from him or why the loss had driven him underground. We do not ask too many questions down here. Everyone has a story, and most of those stories end the same way, with a descent into this darkness that becomes permanent. The specific details matter less than the shared result. We are all rats now, regardless of what we were before. Each of them had a story about why they came. None of them had a story about leaving. The transformation is not just physical. That is the truth that is hardest to explain to anyone who has not experienced it. The Ratway changes how you think, what you value, what you fear. After enough time in the darkness, the surface stops feeling like home and starts feeling like threat. All those people, all that noise, all that light, all those expectations and obligations and connections, the complexity of life above becomes exhausting to even contemplate. I remember what it felt like to care about things. I remember ambition, that burning need to prove myself, to build something, to matter. I remember love, or what I thought was love, that ache for another person's presence that had driven me across the province in pursuit of silk dresses and silver rings. I remember pride and shame and hope, and all those emotions that require a belief in the future, a faith that tomorrow will be different from today. The Ratway cured me of all that, not quickly, not kindly, but thoroughly. When every day is the same, when survival requires your complete attention, when the future extends only as far as your next meal, or your next drink, or your next undisturbed sleep, there is no room left for the luxuries of emotion. You become streamlined, stripped down to essential functions, a creature of pure present tense. Down here, things are simple. Find food, find water, protect your corner, avoid the things that want to hurt you. There is a purity to survival stripped of everything else, a clarity that I had never found in the complicated mess of my former life. No more worrying about debts, because there is nothing left to take. No more worrying about reputation, because everyone here is equally fallen. No more worrying about the future, because the future is just another word for tomorrow, and tomorrow is just another word for more of the same. I think about Whiterun sometimes. I think about the merchant's daughter I was going to marry, who surely found someone else years ago, someone who could give her those silk dresses without losing himself in the process. I think about my father's tannery, which probably passed to a cousin or was sold to strangers, the generations of family tradition ending with my disappearance. I do not feel grief about these things anymore. That is perhaps the most disturbing part. I remember that I should feel grief, that a normal person would mourn what they have lost, but the emotion itself has atrophied from disuse. The Ratway has pruned away everything that was not essential to survival, and grief, it turns out, is not essential. Sometimes new people come down here, clutching their torches and their desperate hopes, and I watch them from the shadows the way Riften once watched me. Most of them die quickly, taken by skeevers or lowlifes, or their own inability to adapt. A few of them find their way back up within the first week, before the changes take root, before the darkness has had time to work its way into their bones. They are the lucky ones, though they will never know it. The rest of us remain. We stay because we have changed too much to leave. We stay because the surface has become more terrifying than anything the Ratway contains. We stay because staying is easier than fighting, and we have all become very, very good at taking the easy path. That is how we ended up here in the first place, most of us. One easy choice after another, each one leading slightly further down, until we looked up and realized we could no longer see the entrance. I could tell you that the Ratway is a prison. That would be true. I could tell you that it is a refuge. That would also be true. The truth is that it is a trap disguised as a sanctuary, a place that offers escape from everything except itself. The guild still knows I am down here. They have not forgotten my debt, but they have also not come to collect it, because what would be the point? I have nothing left to take, and killing me would not recover their investment. I am worth more to them alive, as an example of what happens to those who think they can simply disappear. Occasionally someone mentions seeing a former dock worker in the lower passages, a warning passed along to others who might be considering similar foolishness. I have become a cautionary tale told in whispers, a ghost story for the living. The man who thought he could hide in the shadows and found that the shadows wanted to keep him. Riften died in year 5. I found her in her sleeping corner, curled up like she was just resting, and I think perhaps she was ready to go. 14 years underground is a long time. 14 years of darkness and fear, and the slow erosion of everything that once made you human. She looked peaceful, which is more than most of us can hope for down here. I took her corner. It had better drainage than mine, fewer leaks, walls that were almost dry if you did not press too hard against them. I told myself this was practical, that she would have wanted her space to go to someone who would appreciate it. But the truth is that down here, sentiment is a luxury none of us can afford. The dead do not need corners. The living do. I wonder sometimes who will take my corner when I am gone. I wonder if they will pause before moving in, if they will remember that someone else lived here before them, that someone else carved these small marks into the wall to track the passing days before they stopped bothering to count. Probably not. The Ratway does not encourage memory. It strips everything down to the present moment, to the immediate need, to the next breath and the next drink and the next uncertain step into familiar darkness. That is why no one ever leaves. Not because we cannot find the exit, not because someone is stopping us, but because we have become creatures of this place, adapted so perfectly to its particular horrors that we can no longer survive anywhere else. The surface is still up there, 200 paces and 10 minutes away. I can hear it sometimes, when I press my ear to certain walls, the faint rumble of cartwheels and the distant echo of voices living lives I can no longer comprehend. I do not go to listen anymore. The sound only makes me tired. The water is brown. The darkness is absolute. The scratching of skeevers in the distance is almost like music if you have been down here long enough. And I have been down here long enough.